All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Let us begin. So, Baruch Hashem, begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. Share to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev. To thank Josh and Becca Friedman for dedicating the Shiurim and Drashos this month. Leilui Nishmas Josh, his father, Yisrael Yehuda Ben Chaim Rafal Zichron Levracha. To thank Sammy and Malka Esterson for dedicating the Shiurim and Drashos this month. In memory of their parents, Yitzchak Leib ben haKohen, Sarah Rachel bas Baruch Avraham, Hinda bas Henoch Efraim, and in the schus of the continued health and hatzlacha of Mr. Morton Esterson ad 120 shanim tovos. To thank the Pepper family for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drashos this month in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Yosef Pepper, Yosef Dovid Ben Yaakov. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Steve Goloskov, in honor of his father's first yartzheit, the neshama of נחום Sender ben Mushulam, Shalom Hashem, have an aliyah and enjoy an eternal licht Gan Eden. We thank Ayal Sara Steinberg for dedicating the week of learning and the schus of refuah sheleimah for the continued health of Shalamis bas Susha. We thank our Daf Yomi sponsor for today, the Efron Family, in honor of our Zaydie, great-great-Zaydie and great-great-Zaydie, Yosef Hershel ben Mordechai Halevi, Jerome Efron, on the occasion of his 99th birthday. Wow. Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. Incredible. Well, I will say, I have a strong feeling that also once you reach 99, the only kind of gift that actually matters to you is Torah. Because at the age of 99, anything else and of course your family, but I'm saying anything else that's going to be gashmi, anything else that's going to be material, I can't imagine holds that much weight for you anymore. So beautiful. And of course, again, our Daf Yomi refreshments are sponsored by Gidai Rosenblum in commemoration of the yartzheit of his mother, Rachel Bas Meir, Zichron Levracha. We hope down the merit of the brachas of the Talmud Torah, Mir Tashem, the neshama, staff, and aliyah, and the family in nechama. All right, Rabbi, with that, beautiful to see so many sponsorships, truly heartwarming. So I'll say with that, let us begin. So we are picking up today in Mir Hashem on Daf Mem Zayin. We're actually picking up on the top of the page. 2 dots. Ha'omer l'chavero. So I'll say, so just to reorient ourselves a little bit, this was the last case in the Mishnah. So in this case in the Mishnah, a person said like this. So Omer l'chavero, konem lebeischa sha'ani nichnas. Right, so this is the case where I go over to Ruvain, I say to Ruvain, your home is konam onto me, for me to enter it. Remember again, about say, konam, ultimately again is a kinui, is a similar equivalent expression. Konam means carbon. So effectively, I'm going ahead and top of the page, Mem Zayin, 47a. Right? So we'll say, so essentially what I'm saying is your home is a carbon to me, entering into it. So what's the halacha? Or again, sadcha shani lokeach, or again, your field is konam to me in terms of purchasing it. So what's the halacha? The halacha is ultimately again, meis o shemachu la'acher mutar. If Reuven sells the field, right, or he dies, I'm permitted to go ahead and now enter the house or purchase the field. What's the logic? The logic is because it's no longer Reuven's. The prohibition only was there when it actually belonged to Reuven. Similarly, again, konim bayis zeh shani nichnas, sada zusha ani lokeach, meis o shemachu la'achar asar. However, again, also you've actually seen this already before. If I say this home or this field should be konam to me, then what? Then even if halacha l'maisa, Reuven dies, I still can't go into the house. I still can't purchase the field. Good. So I'll say that was the case in the Mishnah, and the truth is we actually saw it before in earlier sugyas as well. Based on this, something really interesting occurs. Boy Avimi. So Avimi raised the kasha. What was Avimi's kasha? Konim lebayis zeh sha'ato nichnas. So I'll say now this is the reverse case. In this case over here, I go and I say to Reuven, konim lebayis zeh sha'ato nichnas. Reuven, my home, this home, or actually, I'm not really saying my home, I'm saying this home. Reuven, this home should be konam to you in that you cannot enter. So I'm making this home, which is my home, making this home my home, konam onto Reuven. So what's the halacha? Meis, oshemachru la'acher, mahu. So we'll say, what's the halacha? If let's say I die, or I go ahead and I sell it to someone else, is Reuven, what's Reuven's status? What's his relationship ultimately, again, with this piece of property? I'm also take a quick look at the Ran for just a moment. So the Ran is in the wide lines, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines in. Middle of the line where it says Konam. Kolam abai zeh shani nichnas v'sada zeh shani lokeach meisu machol ha'achar aser techevan de bayis zeh ka'amar shavye iluye chaticha disura. Shabbos say, so here's the shayla. So I go ahead, I have a home, we should actually do this outside. I have a home, and I say to Ruvain, Konam bayis zeh sha'ata nichnas. This home is konam onto you for your entering into it. Which Shabbos essentially means what? What am I doing? I'm telling Ruvain, he cannot enter the home. What's the shayla? I die, or I go ahead and I sell it. What's the halacha? Does the prohibition to enter the home still remain upon Ruvain or not? So we'll say, what's the shayla? Here we go. Adam oser davar shebeshuso lichashiyetze mirshuso olo. So we'll say, does a person have the ability to essentially create a level of isser on an item that's in his possession to the point that the item remains prohibited even when it leaves his possession? So we'll say, that's the shayla. In other words, obviously, when the house is mine, am I allowed to say to Ruvain, Konam bayis ze alecha? Can I say that? Yes. Absolutely. Why? It's mine. So what's the shayla? Can I create a level of prohibition, or can I create an isser that will remain on the object even when it's not in my possession? And I will say, when you look at this question, it's strange. What's the havamina that should work? I'm going to say, where would I even think for a moment that I could go ahead and regulate the status of something when it's no longer under my control? So if you think about it, it doesn't make any sense. In other words, when I own the home, to say Ruvain, it's konam onto you, that's fine. Now I take the home, I sell it to Levi. The home has nothing to do with me anymore. Why would there be a havamina that therefore Ruvain can't enter into the house? So we'll say, I'm telling you this now, though, we're going to see it later on, but I think it's an important piece to understand the sugya. And all of this derives, or this havamina derives from the following case. Let's say I say to my son, doesn't mean my son, this is the case in the Gemara. Right? I say to my son, my property is konam onto you during my life and after my death. What's the halacha? My son can't benefit from my property during my lifetime and after my death. That's the springboard for this conversation. Once you have a concept that you can legislate the status of your estate even after your death, and again, that we're going to see everyone agrees with. Everyone agrees you could legislate the status of your estate after your death. That wasn't good English, but you could legislate during your lifetime, right? What's going to happen to your estate after your death? We'll say, what does that show that you can do? That shows that there's a concept of being able to legislate status even when something is no longer technically under your purview. Once I accept that premise, then this havamina becomes possible. So now I'm asking, so I say to Ruvain, this home is konam onto you. This home is konam onto you. Now the home changes possession. Does the prohibition still devolve upon Ruvain? So I'll say, but the formulation is very interesting. Now, Adam oser davar shebershuso lichashiyetze dershuso. Does a person have, let me say differently, does a person have the ability to create a level of isser while an item is under his ownership to the point that the level of isser will remain intact even when what? It's no longer under his ownership or not? That's the shayla. So Rabbi says, Tashma, so here it is. Homer Libno, a person says to his son, Konem shi'yatananeli umeis irashenu. If I say to my son, Konam, my property onto you. Konam, my hana onto you. Which means I'm making a neder that my son should not derive any benefit from me. So what's the halacha? The halacha is when I'm alive, the neder is intact. If I die, the neder is no longer intact. My son has the ability to go ahead and inherit me. On the other hand, again, the hagos changes to bechayai ubemosi. What happens if I say to my son, Konam, my hana onto you during my lifetime and during my death? Oh, then in that case, umeis, and then I die, lo yirashenu. We'll say ultimately again, he doesn't inherit me. What do you see from here? Shma mina, Adam oser davar shebershuso lichashiyetze mershuso shma mina. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, a person indeed does have the ability to legislate the status of property that he currently owns and allow that status to remain even after he no longer owns it. So that's what I pointed out. The paradigmatic case, or the source case for this, is the case of the father and son, right? Father says to his son, Konam, my property onto you, or Kona Hano, my Hano onto you, during my lifetime and during my death. What's the halacha? During the lifetime of the father, son can't benefit, and after the father dies, the son does not inherit him, which shows us that a person is able to create a level of Isser upon property that he currently owns, and if he articulates it in a certain way, that level of Isser could remain even after he no longer owns the property. And I will say that's how the Rambam paskins. The Rambam says over here in Parak Hey, Halacha Hey, of Hilchos Nedarim. Actually, no, maybe we'll save it. Yeah, you know what, let's actually, I'll come back to this halacha. Let's do actually the next case first. And I will say, but again, that is how the Gemara is paskening. Adam oser davar shebershuso. A person can prohibit something when it's in his property, when it's in his reshus, l'chishiyetze mershuso. And the level of Isser will remain even when the item leaves his reshus. So I will say, if you think about it, it's a pretty significant chiddush. Pretty significant chiddush that you could regulate. I will say, it's also like such a, you could regulate the status of an item even if you no longer own it. Also, there's an incredible Musar Haskel in that as well, which is sometimes actions that we perform, actions we engage in, things we say, have a ripple effect long after those things are in my reshus, right? In other words, you say something to someone, the word has, right? So when my words are in my reshus, I go ahead and I control them, right? So now I've said the words have left my reshus, left my reshus. So you might think that the words leave your reshus, that's it. You no longer control their impact. So I will say it's not true. Sometimes the impact I create, even once the words leave my reshus, are still there. Same thing with maisim. So many times we act, we do things, and we fail to recognize that the consequences of our actions live on long after those actions have left our domain. What I do, what I say, how I act, has a ripple effect that often remains intact long after I've even forgotten about the words or forgotten about the actions. What a musar. Let's go back there. So Tnan Hasam. Let's say another Mishnah. Konam peros ha'ilu alai. So listen to this. Person says, Konam these peros onto me. Okay, so we'll say it's a pretty straightforward case. Right? So konam, these fruit should be a konam to me. What am I saying? I'm prohibiting myself from deriving any benefit from these fruit. Or, konam hein al pi, right? Or I say these fruits should be konam to my mouth. Konam hein lifi, right? Ultimately, again, these fruits should be konam to my mouth. So good, both say, all straight out Lashonos, ultimately, again, of an Isser Neder. So we'll say, so what's the halacha? This is very interesting. Asa b'chilufein u'b'gidulehen. Wow, this is really interesting. So I will say, let's work backwards. If you take those fruits, right? So I have a bushel of apples, right? The basket of apples. I say these apples are konam lepi. I'm not allowed to eat them. Okay. Now I will say, imagine I go ahead and I plant those apples, and now a new apple tree grows from it. What's the halacha? I can't benefit from the apple tree. Can't benefit from it. Why not? Because that's called giduleihen. So I will say that's not the bigger chiddush. What's the bigger chiddush? The bigger chiddush is chilufeihen. I will say, if you take a look at Rashi for just a moment. So Rashi says over here, what does it mean chilufeihen? So first of all, God have order. Rashi says giduleihen is shenatar big deal. That's what I just told you. Take the apples, you plant it. So we'll say that makes sense, right? Why does that make sense? Because lamaisa, if I take the apples, plant them, and now an apple tree grows, that apple tree is a derivative of, is it not even a derivative, it's a direct manifestation of the apples which I prohibited to myself, therefore it's asr. But look at Rashi, asr b'chilufein, first short line, in nischalfu b'peiros acheros, v'davar shalom ali olamu. And we'll say, watch this. Let's say I have a basket of apples, I say these apples are konam to my mouth, so I'm not allowed to eat them. And now what happens, I take the basket of apples, I exchange them for a basket of oranges, right? Or I exchange them for money. What's the halacha, says the Gemara? I'm not allowed to benefit from the oranges, I'm not allowed to benefit from the money. Right? Also, it's chilufein. Any item that I exchange the apples for, ultimately, again, is prohibited under the power of the neder. Incredible. So Gemara says, now here's fine. So that's the straightforward halacha of the Gemara. Now the Gemara says, listen to this. Boy Rami Bar Chama, Amar Konam Pero Sa'ilu Al Ploni. This is very interesting. Let's say I have a basket of apples, and I say, my apples should be konam to Ruvain. should be konam to Ruvain. Okay? So we'll say, so now what's the shayla? So, mahu b'chilufeihen. So we'll say, so here's what's interesting. The Gemara doesn't ask about gidulehen, because gidulehen is obvious, right? If I go ahead and I say, Ruvain, this basket of apples is usher unto you, then I plant the basket of apples and it causes an apple tree, it makes sense that apple tree is going to be usher to Ruvain. Why? Because the apple tree is just simply another form of the same exact apples that I prohibited. What about the exchange? I was supposed to say, so let's say I have a basket of apples. I say, Ruvain, these apples are konam to you. These apples are konam to you. And now what happens? Now I exchange the basket of apples for a basket of oranges. Are the oranges usher to Ruvain or not? It's the shayla. So the Gemara says, let's analyze this. Mi amrinan gabi delay hoil va'adam oser peros chavera latzmo adam oser davar shelo bali olam. Now we'll say, let's take a step back for just a moment. Remember again, Rashi said, what's the interesting part about chilufeihen, Rabbi say? What's the interesting part of it? Rashi calls chilufeihen a davar shelo bali olam. What's a davar shelo bali olam? Something that was not in existence at the time the neder was made. So this is very interesting, right? Because think about this. Let's go back to the original case. I said, konam these, this basket of apples for me. So we'll say, now what happens? I exchanged the basket of apples for a basket of oranges. As far as the neder was concerned, did I have in mind the basket of oranges when I went ahead and I spoke about the apples? The pashtus, no. So Rashi calls this a davar shelo bali olam. This was not in existence. So the oranges might have actually been physically in existence. What he means is, in terms of my mindset, right? The oranges were not in existence. We're not in existence at the time I made the neder. So what we see is something very interesting. Yet, when it comes to my own neder prohibits gidulehen, which is obvious, but also prohibits chilufeihen. Also prohibits a davar shelo bali olam. Okay, so now we're asking this follow-up question. What's the following question? I make the neder, Ruvain, konam, this basket of apples to you. You can't get benefit from the apples. So the Gemara takes it for granted that gidulehen is going to be aser. Okay, what about chilufeihen? Now I go ahead and I take the basket of apples, and I exchange it ultimately again for a basket of oranges. Thank you. So what's the shayla? So here we go. Mi amrinan gabe delay. When it comes to the person himself, meaning me. When it comes to, I'm the one who made it. When it comes to me, hoil va'adam oser peros chaver alatzmo. As an individual, I have the ability to prohibit my friend's produce to myself. Therefore, oser davar shelo bali olam alatzmo. I can also aser a davar shelo bali olam, something that was not yet in existence at the time of my neder upon myself. So the Gemara saying is like this. The same way I could take something external to me and make it aser to me, so I could also make a davar shelo bali olam aser upon myself as well. Right? In other words, so I could go ahead and I could say Ruvain's produce is aser to me. So it's also a davar shelo bali olam as well. The basket of oranges, which I didn't have in mind at the time of the neder, also becomes aser to me. On the other hand, gabi chavero, hoyovein adam oser peros chavero al chavero. So on the other hand, when it comes to my friend, Ruvain, right, I can't answer Ruvain's fruit upon Ruvain. Right? In general, we'll say, this is a general halacha. But we'll say, you know where we know this from? The paradigmatic example of this is avodah zarah. The halacha is, if you go ahead and you worship someone's item, chas v'shalom, as avodah zarah, you can't transform that item into avodah zarah. So can you imagine, by the way, you get into a fight with your neighbor, right? He rolls up in his brand new car, and you say, watch this, right? You take out your prayer rug, you go ahead, you bow down to the car, right? Make the car into avodah zarah. You say to yourself, but that's also an isser misa. You'd be surprised what people would be willing to do to get back at their friends, right? So let's say, or former friends, right? So can you imagine? So the halacha is, you cannot go ahead and transform, even if you worship someone else's item as avodah zarah, you can't transform it into a deity, in form of idolatry. So Rabbi said this concept of Adam, right? You cannot aser your friend's payros upon your friend. You can't aser anything upon your friend. I take that back. You can't aser something. That's all of these cases. I'll ask you something. In other words, I can't take Ruvain's produce and make Ruvain's produce aser onto him. Therefore, we'll say the same way, perhaps, that I can't go ahead and take Ruvain's produce and make Ruvain's produce aser onto him. So too, Ein adam oser davar shala bali olam al chavero. Maybe I also can't make a davar shala bali olam asra upon my friend. See, I will say, what can I do? See, I can take my bushel of apples, and make a neder, and through that neder, prohibit the bushel of apples on Ruvain. That I can do. But maybe, if I go ahead and I exchange those apples for oranges, the neder doesn't devolve upon the oranges. Why not? Because the oranges are a davar shalab ali olam, and in the same way that I can't take Ruvain's produce and make it asr upon Ruvain, maybe I also can't take a davar shalab ali olam and make it asr upon Ruvain as well. The other possibility is, Odilma, mishum dechilufan ki gidulan dami, lo shnohu v'lo shno chavero. Or I'll say maybe not. Maybe chilufeyan and gidulehan are kind of like a unit, and that's why they're mentioned together. And therefore, wherever gidulein is going to be problematic, so chilufein is going to be the same thing. And therefore, there's just same way that ultimately they will say, if I make an enter for myself, right? I make it, I'm not eating a basket of apples. So gidulein, if I plant the apples and they grow a tree, can't eat it. Chilufein, exchange the apples, still can't eat the basket of oranges. So too again, the semi chilufein and gidulein works by me. Chilufein and gidulein is a unit. So too by Ruvain, giduleihen works. So therefore chilufein will also be asar. So we'll say that's the shaila. So again, let's just frame this. So here's what it seems like everybody agrees with. If I make a neder and I say this basket of apples is asar to me. If I plant the apples and it grows a tree, what's the halacha? Still asr. If I exchange the basket of apples for a basket of oranges, still asr. This is for me, right? Everyone agrees with that. The shaila is, I make a neder now prohibiting my basket of apples to Ruvain. So everyone's going to agree that halacha l'maisa gidulein, if you take those apples, plant it, it grows a tree, it's still going to be asr to Ruvain. The shaila is chilufeihen. If you exchange the apples for a basket of oranges, what is the status of that basket of oranges for Ruvain? So we have two possibilities. Working backwards, we say, listen, maybe chilufein and gidulein is just a unit. And if giduleihen is prohibited, chilufein is prohibited, in that case, it would be asar Ruvain as well. On the other hand, maybe not. Maybe the reason ultimately, again, why chilufeihen works, chilufein is the davar shalab ali olam. The same way by myself, I could asar my friend's produce onto myself. Therefore, I could also asar a davar shalab ali olam. But by my friend, I can't asr my friend's produce onto himself. Maybe I can't asr a davar shalab ali olam as well. So that's the shaila. So here the Gemara says, so let's answer it up. Amr Acha bar Yumi, Tashma, Homer the Ishto. So this is an interesting case. Homer the Ishto, Konam she'eni nana lech. So we'll say, this is actually very interesting. Now if you take a look, take a look at that goes v'tziyunim. You see it? It's on the bottom left. Bottom left, just when you thought the print could not get any smaller, it actually does. So as I said, now listen to this. So he just changes the girsa here. The girsa says, Perish lav ma'ashani nana mimech chavar ella hanaasi lach. Okay, what this is the case of us is as follows. A man says to his wife, right, konam my hana'ah to you. Konam my hana'ah to you. So essentially what he's doing is he's saying to his wife that she is prohibited to get any hana'ah from him. That's the case. Right? They're going to be in Dr. Solomon's or Dr. Kropkin's office very soon, right after making this statement, right? So I say, so ultimately again, so go ahead, right? So konam, ultimately again, you're not getting any hana'ah from me. Okay, I will say, now what's the problem with this? There are many problems with this, right? I will say, but one of the problems is the wife has a right to mizonos, right? And therefore, halacha l'maisa, again, how is she getting mizonos? So watch this. It's actually very interesting. So the Gemara says, lova usu'ubale chovin ban v'nefraim. So we'll say, what could she do? She could borrow money to go ahead and pay for mizonos. And I will say, what happens? The creditors go to the husband for repayment. Now I will say, now this is very interesting. What's the problem? If she's borrowing money and the husband is paying the debt, they will say, what is she getting? Hano. Isn't that in violation of the neder? Rather, it must be what? This is incredible. My time about Efron. This is so interesting. So why is it that the creditors have the ability to collect money from the husband? If at the end of the day, wouldn't that be a violation of the neder? In other words, isn't the wife going ahead and getting hana from the husband? It must be mishum chilufin lav kigidulin dami. It will say it must be that what? Listen to this. You see, when the wife borrows money to get mazonos and then gets mazonos, and then the creditors go ahead and come to get repayments from the husband, see, I will say that's chilufein, right? Remember, the hana that she received was the money she got from the creditor. The money that the husband's paying back is something different. So it's an exchange. It's an exchange. So you see from here that when you make a neder prohibiting someone to get hana from you, the neder really only devolves upon the primary object, not any exchange for the object. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, the repayment of the debt is effectively considered to be chilufein in exchange, and therefore ultimately again it should be permitted. Quite interesting. To which the Gemara says, Amar Rava, maybe not. So what's very interesting? Maybe the Gemara says, maybe not. Maybe in reality, this process should not be done. But if it was done, it works. Meaning what? We'll say, take a look at the Ran. First wide line in the Ran. First wide line. V'dilma l'chatchilahu delo v'avid avid kilomar kishubala hachlif isr behetra l'chatchila b'yadayim aser v'echlifan asurin avazu b'shar shalafsa alfa pisha bal mischayev ein kan chalife isr mamish hilchach yicholihi l'lavos v'lecha v'afa pisha achar kach nifroim min abal di'avid hu she'asu chalibin l'mashacha. Shabbos said it's very interesting, but the way the Ran understands, Shabbos said, Pasha Pshat is how we should understand the statement of the Gemara. What the Gemara is saying is ideally, Chilufin is Asar. But if you did it, you did it. The Ran is explaining a little bit differently. The Ran is saying this case of the woman is not really a case of Chilufin. I will say, what's the case of Chilufin? What's the case of Chilufin? What's the case? Where there is a direct exchange. Right? I have a basket of apples. Right? I have a basket of apples, and I directly exchange that basket of apples, not for a basket of oranges. That's what the Gemara says. If I made the neder, I'm not getting hana from the basket of apples, right? Ultimately, again, and I exchange it for a basket of oranges. Chilufein asurin, a direct exchange. The Gemara suggests this is not a case of a direct exchange, right? We'll say, right? This is not a case of direct exchange. What's happening over here? Husband made a neder. Wife can't get hana from me. What does she do? She goes out. She borrows money. She gets mazonos. Creditors come back for a bit. This is not a case of direct exchange. So because it's not a case of direct exchange, therefore halacha l'maisa is going to be mutter. But maybe, what the Ran is saying is maybe in a case of direct exchange, it would be aser. It would be aser even for someone else. It would be aser. So the Gemara goes out. The Gemara says, "Elo tashmas." We're still trying to resolve our question. Again, just want to be clear. We're hyper focused on one case here. What's the one case? I have a basket of apples. I say, Ruvain, konam this basket of apples to you. So we'll say, so what's our shayla? I exchanged the basket of apples for a basket of oranges. Now my shayla is the basket of oranges usher to Ruvain or not? That's our shayla. So we tried to prove it by the case of the Isha. The Gemara says not a good case. Why? That's not a real case of chilufein. That's not a direct exchange. It's a very indirect exchange. So watch this. Elo, Toshma, listen to this. Hamekadesh ba'arla ila mikudeshes. Supposed to listen to this. A man is mekadesh his wife with arla. So we'll say, so listen to this. So Reuven goes over to Rachel. We'll say, what's Arla? Arla is fruit of the first 3 years, right? You plant the tree, right? First 3 years, the fruit is Arla. So Reuven shows up, right? Reuven shows up at Rachel's doorstep with a beautiful bushel of apples. Only one problem is Arla. They will say, what's the problem with Arla? Arla is Asar Bana. You can't get benefit from Arla. Right? So obviously, again, in order for any kind of item, right, or financial instrument to be usable for Kiddushin, it has to be mutar ba'anosh. A woman has to be able to get benefit from it. So she can't get benefit from the Arla. So we'll say, so now watch this. Now watch this. Machron v'kiddush b'dimeyan harizu mikudeshes. But I will say, if he sells the Arla, and ultimately, again, uses the money to affect Kiddushin, ultimately, again, it works. It works. Now, I will say, what does that show you? What does that show you? That chilufeihen, the exchange of an item, does not have the status of the original item. Take a quick look at Rashi. Rashi is, we'll say, in the second white line in Rashi, left-hand side, Machar v'kiddush v'dimei mekudeshes, Alma, the chalifin lav kigidulin dami. The Gidul and Asar Bichlei Mishter. So watch this. So if Reuven shows up with a basket of arla to his kala, Hariat Mikudeshas Li Ba'arla Zu, and what does she do? Slams the door in his face. Get a job, right? Get a job. Bring me something real for Kiddushin. Come on, get it together, right? So I will say, I don't need to project, right? I will say, but Lamaisa. So what happens now? He goes and he sells the arla, comes back with a bag of money, gives her the money, and she's mikudeshes. It works. Really? So fascinating. What does that show you? That chilufeihan lav ki gidulin. Right, that ultimately the exchange of something prohibited has a permitted status. Does not. In other words, when you exchange a prohibited item for something else, the prohibited status does not devolve upon the secondary item. V'haraya, the money of the arla is able to affect kiddushin. So I will say, using this logic again, plugging this back in, what will we say? I say to Reuven, this basket of apples should be usher to you. Konam, this basket of apples to you. And now exchange the basket of apples for a basket of oranges. What should be the status of the oranges? Mutter, right? Mutter. Why? Because what have we just shown? That the exchange does not take on the status of the original item. Just like when you sell the arla, the money becomes permitted. So too the oranges should be permitted as well. To which the Gemara says, no. I will say, again, what the Gemara is saying is like this. When the Gemara says it works, what does it mean it works? It works b'diavad, right? The avid. In other words, I will say, no one's going to say that really l'chatchila you should sell arla and go ahead and use the proceeds of that sale for kiddushin, right? L'chatchila one should not do it. Why? Because l'chatchila we say chilufeihen is ki gidulehen. Right? Ultimately, again, the exchange of a prohibited item takes on the same status as the original prohibited item. It's just b'diavad. If you did it, it works. The avid. If you did it, ultimately, again, it'll work. Good. So let's close this out. So now, the way this, the sugya doesn't really seem to end in a totally definitive way. So let's analyze this a little bit. So let's see, what is the halacha l'maisa? So essentially what we have is really two questions. Right? Two questions. Ultimately, so question number one. So actually let's work backwards. So we'll say, how do we pass in this last case? So again, here's what I know. I make a neder to go that this basket of fruit should be konam to me. So we'll say, if I take the fruit, I take the basket of apples and I plant them and make a new apple orchard, what's the halacha? Aser. What do we call that? Giduleyan. Excellent. If I take the basket of apples and I exchange for a basket of oranges, what's the halacha? Aser. Why on me? Aser why? Chilufeihen. What's our shayla? I say, Reuven, the basket of apples should be konam to you. So now I say, plant the apples and it grows an orchard. What's the halacha for Reuven? What's the halacha? Aser. They will say, no one's arguing on that. Why? Because halacha might say it's clear that the new apples are an extension of the old ones. What happens if I change the basket of apples for a basket of oranges? So we'll say, that's the machlokes case. Listen to the Rambam. Hilchos Nedarim, Perek Vav, Halacha Tes Vav. Ha'oser peirosav al chaveiro. Bein beneder, bein b'shvua, get ready for this. Hare gidulehen, v'chilufeihen, safek. See what I say? The Rambam is picking up the sugi. If you notice, by the way, the Rambam is doing two things over here. The first thing the Rambam will say is doing is he's saying, by the way, gidulehen and chilufeihen is a unit. There's no such thing as subdividing them. They're a unit. Now why does he say safek? Because the Gemara doesn't come to a resolution. Right? The Gemara leaves it totally open-ended. I've also what the Gemara makes it sound like is, lechatchila, we say ultimately again, gidulehen is going to be aser. Right? But bidi eved, gidulehen will not, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Lechatchila, chilufeihen will be aser. But bidi eved, chilufeihen seems to take on a status of its own. That's what the Gemara sounds like. So Rambam says it's a safek. Therefore, lefichach, Chaveru asar begidulei peros elu b'chilufeihen. So we'll say salacha l'maisa. So therefore, watch this. Look what the Rambam says. So I go ahead. I take the basket of apples. I say Reuven, konam this basket of apples to you. So now we'll say. So now what happens? The chatchila. What do we say to Reuven? You cannot get any benefit from the apples if the apples are planted and then go into an apple orchard, or if they're exchanged for something else. That's the chatchila. However, the Rambam says, but if the apples were planted and they grew an orchard and Reuven benefited from it, he's not in violation. or the basket of apples was exchanged for a basket of oranges. If he got hana, he got hana. So we'll say fascinating. So the Rambam paskins chilufeyan v'gidulehen by Ruvain is a suffix case. Any case of something lechatchila, we will tell Ruvain you are aser b'gidulehen or b'chilufeyan, but if you benefited from it, you are not in violation of a neder. Incredible. Good. So I will say, so what about the previous case? Remember again, the way we started out the sugya, I will say was, I say to Ruvain, konam my house unto you. So I will say, what was the shayla? If I then go ahead and sell the house to someone else, does the status remain or not? So I will say, the way the Gemara seemed to end off was saying that Allah a person has the ability to asr something that he currently owns, and that level of Isser will remain with the item even when he no longer owns it. So Rabbi says, interestingly enough, the Rambam says, same parak hey alocha hey hilchos nedarim. The Rambam says, Amar lo peiros elu asurun alecha, v'lo amar peirosai. So we'll say, so remember again, this is a distinction we made before, that the Gemara is not making it, the Gemara Mishnah made it. So if a person says, these peiros should be asur to you, afa pi shemachron o shemes v'nofel la'achar, hare elu asurun alav. So say, if you phrase the neder not in the possessive, but in the general, Ruvain, these peiros are asur to you. Konam, these peiros to you. That level of isser remains upon the peiros even when I no longer own the peiros. Even if I sell them, right? Why? Sha'oser davar shu shalo achavero. Because if I ask for something that belongs to me, I ask for it upon my friend. Afa pi sheyatzim mershuso. Harehubi Isura Omeid. Rabbi says Rambam Paskins like the Gemara, namely that when you create a level of Isra upon something that you currently own, that level of Isra remains with the object even if the object leaves your ownership. Elim Kin, I will say now the exception to this rule is Elim Kin Amar Nechasai Obesi. We learned this before. If the way you phrase the Neder Rabbi says is how? In the possessive, my house, my fruit, is usher to you, then Rabbi say in that case what? If I sell it or I die, it's no longer in my possession, then in that case, the Isser goes away with me. So two very important pieces of halacha. So again, halacha, so the Rambam adapts the concept of Adam Oser Davar Birshuso, and ultimately again, Hareu bi Surah Omer. I can ask for something while it's under my ownership, and that level of Isser remains with the object, even when I no longer own it. And halacha l'maisa, if I go ahead and I ask for something upon my friend, l'chatchila, he remains asr begidulein bechilufein, but b'di'evet, if he got hana, there is no penalty for that. Incredible. So let's begin the Mishnah. Harini alayich cherim. So it's very interesting. I say to my friend, then I will say, up until now, we've been using the lashon of konam. Now we're transitioning a little bit, and we use lashon of cherim. I go over to her and say, Ruvain, I am cherem unto you. I am cherem unto you. They will say, if you never learn Nedarim, somebody says to you like, oh, thank you, right? I don't know, right? Okay, right. Shabbos to you too, right? Right, so I'll say, so now that's why it's good to learn. Right, Harini cherem alayich, so I am cherem unto you. So if you look at the Ran, second to last line, I will say from the bottom, second to last line, Harini alayich cherem, shetehei hana aso alav kecherem, shal bedek habayis. So I will say, cherem means, an item that is cherem is an item that belongs to the Beis HaMikdash. Now I will say, the Ran is pointing out over here, what type of what is cherem? Cherem means something that's owned for bedek habayis. Bedek habayis means temple upkeep. Well, if you remember again, in the beginning of the sugya, we were talking about the concept. That halacha l'maisa, that there are two different types of hegdish. Right? There's kidushas damim and kidushas haguf. There's monetary sanctity and there's physical sanctity. Right? So, for example, when you're makdish a karban, behema zu ola, right? That animal has physical sanctity. As opposed to if you take a beam, right, a beam of wood, and you say, that's hagdish, that has financial sanctity. So we'll say, so the Ran just pointing out, when a person says, I am cherem is a level of financial sanctity. So ultimately, again, so what am I saying? So what I'm saying to Ruvain is, Ruvain, I am cherem unto you. What that statement actually means is, I'm saying to Ruvain, you are not allowed to get any hana'ah from me. That's what's happening over here. So what's the halacha? Hamudar aser, the person who is the subject of the vow. Ruvain, Right? So if I say to Ruvain, I am cherem to you, Rabbi say, who has the Isser over here? Who has the Isser? Ruvain. In that Ruvain is not permitted to get any hana from me. Okay. Hari'at alai cherem. If I say Ruvain, you are cherem unto me, then what? Hanoder aser. I, the person who's making the neder, I am aser. Doesn't mean I am aser. In other words, I am the one who cannot get any benefit from Ruvain. Harini alayich va'at alai. So let's say again, I say to Ruvain, all right, I am cherem unto you. You are cherem unto me. So what happens? Shnei masur. They're both asur to get hana from one another. Now both say, now watch this. So here's what's fascinating. Now, once we get into a situation of what we'll call mutual isser, we're going to get into the interesting topic about what about items that are jointly owned. So therefore, the Mishnah says, "Ushnei mutar b'davar sha'olei bavel." And I will say they are both permitted to get benefit from things that were created for the benefit of those who came back from Bavel. So I will say we're going to see. If you look at the last round on the daf, the round says mutar b'davar sha'olei bavel shef kirim olei bavel l'chol Yisrael. I will say we're going to see something very interesting. That when the Jews from Bavel came back to Eretz Yisrael, what they did is on the way back between Bavel and Eretz Yisrael, they created a number of wells. They did this on their way back, right, with Ezra and Nehemiah, right, to God. But even more than that, remember, even when the Jews came back with Ezra and Nehemiah to rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash, the majority of Jews did not come back. They did not come back. So there was still a whole population in Bavel. When they rebuilt the second Beis HaMikdash, so remember again, there's now once again a chiyuv of aliyah l'regel, which means every Yom Tiv you had Jews coming from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. So there was a wells all along the way. Those are called the wells of Olei Bavel. So we'll say in this case over here, Reuven and Shimon have just made right. Reuven says to Shimon, Hareini alayich va'at alai. Right, Reuven, I am also to get benefit from you, and you are also to get benefit from me. So I will say, so in this case, the Mishnah just points out they're permitted to get benefit from the wells between Bavel and Eretz Yisrael. What's the reason for that? I will say because ultimately, again, those wells, the Ran says, Shef Kiram Olei Bavel L'chol Yisrael. The wells are essentially hefker for all of Klal Yisrael. Okay. Dabam memches va'asurim b'davar shel osa ha'ir. Oh, very interesting. And I will say, but watch this. Let's say Reuven and Shimon live in the same city. So we'll say, as residents of the city, there are certain things that the residents own jointly. Well, any part of the city that's owned jointly, neither Reuven nor Shimon have the ability to benefit from. Right? Why, Rabbi? Say why? Because remember again, since they own it jointly, if Reuven benefits from it, then what? He's benefiting from Shimon. If Shimon benefits from it, then he's benefiting from Reuven. So as if they live in the same city, any jointly owned city items, neither one can benefit from. So the Mishnah defines these terms. The Mishnah says, "Ve'ezu davar sha'olei bavel." What's an example of something owned by Olei Bavel or something belonging to Olei Bavel? Kigon harabayis. Incredible what I will say. Harabayis. So by the way, that's another way of also saying is harabayis is owned by no one, and therefore it's the possession of everyone. So it's actually very interesting because remember again, even though the Gemara speaks about this, that technically speaking, the tribal line between Yehuda and Binyamin actually runs through the Beis HaMikdash. But interestingly enough, we hold that Yerushalayim lo nischalka l'shvatim. Yerushalayim does not belong to any one of the shvatim. It belongs to everyone. But specifically, Harabayis Rabosai is not considered to be the property of anyone, right? Any one individual. So therefore, for example, even in this case, where Reuven and Shimon now are not permitted to benefit from each other, ultimately, again, they can still go to Harabayis. Va'azaras. Same thing with the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. V'habar shebe'emtza haderech. And I will say, the pit ultimately, again, refers to the watering hole, right? The well, the cistern on the road up between Bavel and Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so we'll say, so these are examples of items that belong to Olei Bavel, and therefore halacha l'maisa, both Reuven and Shimon are permitted to get benefit from it. Ve'ezehu davar shel osair. So I will say, what's an example of something that belongs to the city? Kigon harachava, the town square. V'hamerchatz, the bathhouse. Beis HaKnesses, the shul. Teva, ultimately the aron. V'hasvarim, and ultimately books. So we'll say all of these svarim, books, literally again, these all refer to items that if you live in a city, it's jointly owned by the residents of the city. So the problem about Sa'ir is anything joint, if you think about it, right? Reuven and Shimon live in the same city. Reuven and Shimon live in the same city. So now what happens? Reuven said, I'm chayrim to you and you're chayrim to me. They can't benefit from each other. So we'll say, what's the problem? The problem is, if they benefit from any of the jointly owned town's property, in every jointly owned town's property, we'll say, what happens? Reuven has a chelik and Shimon has a chelik, right? They both have a chelik in the same property. So what's the problem? If Reuven benefits from it, then what is he effectively doing? What is he doing? He's benefiting from Shimon. And if Shimon benefits from it, what is he benefiting from? From Reuven. So we'll say this is interesting contradistinction between assets of a city, or property of a city which may be jointly owned, versus what we call property of Olei Bavel, which is free to be used by every member of Klal Yisrael, but what? Belongs to no one. So because it belongs to no one, both Reuven and Shimon are permitted to get benefit from it, as opposed to some of the assets of the city, the property of the city, which is jointly owned. If they have mutually restrictive Nedarim, neither of them are permitted to get benefit from it. So we'll stop over for today. We're stopping mid Mishnah, but let's stop over here. Let's hop in a few minutes on Mesilas Yesharim before our time runs out. Beautiful beginning to the week. Good.